Hello, everyone. Welcome to Awaken Your Freedom Show. Please subscribe to support our growing community.
Hey everyone, so today we're going to do one of our deep dives. We've been looking at some really interesting sources that kind of challenge the usual ways we think about, personal growth and change.
Yeah, the standard way seems to be all about these huge, massive goals, right?
Yeah.
Like, got to hit this giant target or else.
Exactly. But what we're exploring today is this idea, well, what if transformation isn't really about that struggle? What if it's more about getting curious, taking really small steps, iterating?
Less climbing a giant mountain, more like
Yeah.
exploring a new path, following your curiosity.
That's pretty much the core of it. We're digging into stuff primarily from Tiny Experiments, Rewiring Life as a Playground by Anne-Laure LeCunff, and some related ideas.
Okay.
And our goal here really is to pull out the key stuff. How can this whole Tiny Experiments idea help you, listening right now, turn that feeling of being totally overwhelmed into something more like, well, exploration, sustainable progress.
Yeah, let's start with that overwhelm, because I think that's super relatable. Traditional self-help, it feels like it pushes these enormous goals, lose 50 pounds, get 10,000 followers, land the absolute dream job tomorrow.
Right. And look, having big dreams isn't bad in itself, but these sources really point out a psychological problem. When the goal is just so big and you're way over here, the gap feels massive. And that creates this intense pressure.
It feels impossible sometimes, like you're staring up at this huge cliff face thinking, how am I ever going to climb that?
Exactly that feeling. And it often just paralyzes you, right? Stops you before you even start. Or, you hit one little bump.
Which always happens.
Always.
Yeah.
And because the stakes feel so high that one stumble feels like complete failure. So you just give up. It sort of frames your life like a performance hall. Everything has to be perfect.
Ugh. Yeah, who wants that constant pressure? So this is where the Tiny Experiments idea comes in as the alternative. It sounds like it flicks that whole performance idea.
It really does. The basic question is, what if change wasn't this huge battle of willpower, but more about just being genuinely curious, running little tests, low stakes?
Reframing life.
Yeah.
Not as a giant to-do list, but like a playground, or you said a lab.
A lab. Yeah, I like that metaphor too. Think about it. Labs are for experimenting, right? You test things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. That's expected. It's part of learning.
It feels safer, less judgment.
Exactly. And the big mindset shift is getting off autopilot. Stop just doing the same old thing and consciously pause and ask, what if I experimented here? What if I tried something tiny and different? It's about injecting that deliberate curiosity.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. There was that example in the source material, right?
Yeah.
The designer. Grilling meat.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. So she wanted to get better at cooking meat, but her kitchen was tiny. Felt kind of intimidating. She didn't make some grand declaration like, I will become a grilling master.
Right, so what did she do?
She just leaned into being an experimenter, treated her kitchen like her own little lab, took small pieces of meat, systematically tried different cooking times, different temperatures.
I took notes?
Yeah, took careful notes, what worked, what didn't. There was zero pressure for it to be this amazing meal. It was just pure curiosity, cause and effect.
So the goal wasn't the perfect steak right away. It was just understanding the process.
Exactly. And by focusing just on that process, that experimentation, the sources say she actually got good pretty quickly. But more than that, she rediscovered how much fun learning can be. It wasn't about the end goal. It was the enjoyment of figuring things out. Prototyping passion, they called it.
Wow, okay. That really shows how shifting the focus makes daunting things feel doable.
Yeah.
So if curiosity is the engine, how do you actually structure these little steps? You mentioned a framework. PACT.
PACT, that's like your template for setting up a tiny experiment. It's a really specific statement you make. I will do this specific action for this specific short time. And the letters stand for something. It has to be purposeful. You know why you're doing it, even if it's just curiosity. Manageable. This is key. Repeatable, you can do it consistently. And trackable, you can measure or observe it somehow.
So not just, I'll exercise more, but something really concrete.
Way more concrete. And small. The example they use is, I will run for 2 minutes each morning for 1 week.
2 minutes? That sounds almost ridiculously small. Like, is that even worth doing?
And that's the genius of it. The sources really stress this. Making it that easy removes almost all the resistance, all the pressure. The point isn't the 2 minutes itself, it's the commitment to running the experiment.
Ah, okay.
You commit to the PACT with zero guilt, zero pressure. Just, I'm going to do this and see what happens. The M for manageable makes starting feel effortless. The R for repeatable lets you gather data over that week. And the T for trackable, that's crucial. That's how you get your field notes for the next step.
Noticing what happens. I like that. Takes the judgment right out of it. You're not grading yourself, just observing.
Precisely. And that observation, that noticing, leads right into the next really important piece. Taking field notes and reflecting. These tiny experiments aren't just one-and-done things.
Right.
So after your PACT is finished, say, that week of 2-minute runs, you don't just stop, you pause, you kind of process what happened.
This is where you turn the noticing into actual learning.
Exactly. You turn data into direction. The sources suggest asking yourself specific questions like, okay, what felt easy about that? What was hard? And maybe the most critical one, what next?
What next?
Yeah, that structured reflection is where the insight comes from. It's discovery, but without beating yourself up. You're just figuring out the landscape based on where you just walked.
And that what next question, that feels like it fuels the whole thing forward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about hitting some final target, but using what you just learned to decide the very next tiny step.
You got it. That's the core of what they call iterative growth, and why it's often better than chasing huge linear goals. Think about it. Traditional goals are like firing a rocket. If your initial aim is off by just a tiny bit,
You end up way off course later on.
right. But iterative growth is more like sailing. You have a general direction, sure, but you're constantly feeling the wind, watching the waves, making small adjustments based on what's happening right now.
Feels much more flexible.
Yeah.
Less chance of a major crash.
Totally. There's another example they mentioned, this Redditor, right? Wanted to eat better, feel more confident, but the idea of a massive lifestyle change was just too much. Overwhelming.
So they didn't jump into some crazy diet or intense workout plan?
Nope. Their tiny experiment, their PCT, was super simple. I will cook one new recipe each week. That was it.
One recipe a week.
Okay. And they followed that loop. Observation, my diet isn't great. Question, maybe cooking could help? Packed. Cook one new recipe this week. Reflect. How'd that go? Easy, hard, enjoy it. What recipe should I try next week?
And just repeating that simple, small loop. What happened?
It built momentum, slowly but surely. They didn't just get better at cooking. Their confidence grew because they were proving to themselves they could learn and change. Healthier choices started happening more naturally because they were engaged in this positive process. It wasn't about deprivation, it was growth through these little experiments. Shows how real change often starts super small and trackable.
That really underlines one of the big benefits, doesn't it? It just takes the pressure cooker feeling away. If you're just experimenting, a failure isn't really a failure.
Exactly. It's just data, information for the next experiment. The sources talk about avoiding goal imprisonment, that feeling of constantly being judged against these huge, rigid targets. It leads to burnout, anxiety, feeling like you're never good enough.
Yeah, that's exhausting.
Tiny experiments kind of free you from that. It makes the whole process feel more like play, less like pressure.
And it doesn't have to be a solo game either, right? The sources mentioned doing this with others. Social flow.
Oh yeah, definitely. This experimental mindset can be really powerful in groups or teams. When people start sharing their PACTs, their little experiments, their reflections, the learning just multiplies.
Because everyone benefits from everyone else's data, basically.
Right. My experiment informs your next step, and yours informs mine. And they mentioned this point from, I think it was SXSW, that teams doing this together build psychological safety.
Makes sense.
When it's okay to try things, observe, and even have experiments not pan out as hoped because you still learn something, it creates this culture where learning is valued just as much as hitting some specific outcome. Makes the whole group stronger, more adaptable.
Okay, so let's try to pull the threads together here. The big takeaways, the really fresh insights from these sources. First, it's that huge mindset shift, right? Life isn't a performance hall. It's more like a lab.
Yeah, a lab where you get to discover stuff. And that means success gets redefined. It's not about hitting the target perfectly. Success is the learning. You win by discovering.
Which also means pace over perfection. Those tiny, sustainable steps build momentum and stop you from burning out. Whereas those giant leaps often just lead to falling down.
Right. And that other really interesting idea, identity by iteration. You don't just decide to be different. You kind of become different through the experiments you run. Who you are emerges from this cycle of trying, observing, learning.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has given us some really practical stuff. So for you listening right now, thinking about all this, how do you actually start using tiny experiments to get unstuck, ditch that overwhelm, and, stop guessing about how to make changes?
Well, the sources have a pretty clear call to action. This isn't just theory to think about, it's an invitation to actually step into your own lab.
Stop guessing. Start testing. That's the mantra.
Pretty much. And they give some really easy starting points, things that take almost no effort, just a little bit of curiosity. Don't wait for motivation, just set up a tiny PCT.
Like, maybe try a 5-minute breathing pact. Just sit and notice your breath for 5 minutes a day, maybe for the next 3 days. See what happens.
Perfect example. Or maybe start your day with a quick creative sketch. 5 minutes, no judgment, just put something on paper.
Or here's one. Invite someone new or someone you don't know well for a quick coffee. Maybe do it 3 times this week. Just 3 small chats, see how it feels.
The key is setting that small, manageable PPCT, sticking to the short duration. And then this is crucial, actually taking a moment to document it. What did you notice? What came up for you?
Because, like the sources really drive home, action is the fastest way to get clarity. That next tiny experiment you run. It's not just a small action, it's how you discover your next best move.
And maybe that leads us to a final thought, something provocative for you to chew on after this. If we really buy into this idea that success is learning, that life is this series of experiments, how does that change how you think about failure when one of your experiments doesn't go as planned? What does failure even mean then?
Good question to ponder. Okay, wrapping up here. To close, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Spotify, to stay sharp and never miss a drop of knowledge that could change your financial life. Thank you.